Now to discuss is Sarah Nelson, the international president of the Association of Flight Attendants. She represents 50,000 flight attendants at 20 airlines. And I'm so eager for your perspective, Sarah, because so often we hear about this from the traveler's perspective. But I can't imagine how trying this must be for the people who are working those flights and dealing with those delays. You know, my niece just flew into Newark a couple of nights ago, and they sat on the tarmac for, I think, 30 minutes waiting for someone who could actually open the door to the plane. There wasn't somebody to open the door, right? I mean, the staffing shortages are just intense. How is it being felt on your end?
It's very difficult for the people on the front lines, and I appreciate your empathy and understanding, and actually we've heard that from a lot of travelers, so thank you for making that a part of your reporting. But, you know, staffing was cut down to minimum levels prior to the pandemic, so some of this was some of the extrication of the costs from the airlines before the pandemic even hit, and that was being pushed then into stock buybacks, and we were protesting that a lot. But now today, for us on the front lines, when there's delays like this is very hard on the crew. Oftentimes, crews are waiting for 1, 2, 3, 4 hours to get in touch with the crew scheduler. That means if we're not getting our next assignment, we're timing out. And so we're very frustrated with the airlines on the back end on operational support during this time, too.
It's just remarkable. You talk about how the airlines, well, there's just no slack. There's just zero slack. So you have this huge demand for travel at a time when you have staffing shortages, you throw in weather. I mean, it is literally a perfect storm in many cases for some of these flights. What do you think needs to be done here? Cutting capacity, canceling some of these flights ahead of time? I mean, I know United and some of the airlines have been cutting, 50 flights a day out of Newark, for example, because, why make the promise of a flight on time if you're not going to be able to deliver?
Right. So absolutely. And the airlines did, in advance of this holiday weekend, take out some of the capacity, so that we're not overpromising. We don't need people coming to the airport and then not being able to take care of them. So that was helpful, and that needed to happen. But they also need to make sure that they are getting crews to these flights on the front end of their trips, so positive space. Many of the crew members are commuting by air from other cities because it's too expensive to live in the hubs where we're based. So the airlines need to provide that support. They need to staff up on the operational support, like I was just talking about. And they can do these things very quickly, as opposed to very skilled jobs that take time to get people into them. So cut back on that capacity, not overpromise, provide that operational support. And also, they need to get busy at the negotiating table. We need to negotiate contracts that are going to attract people to these professions so that we can get them in the pipeline of training and get through this, hopefully, in the next several months here. That's more of a longer-term issue, but they need to get on it now.
Sarah, there's been plenty of criticism for the airline industry that they did not foresee this inevitable jump in demand, that they cut too many jobs during COVID after receiving more than $50 billion of taxpayer funds, right, to prevent layoffs. And they still had all of these buyouts of pilots and the like. Is all that criticism fair? Should the airlines have managed this better?
Look, that payroll support did not cover. It covered about 50% of the payroll, and it did go directly to the workers. It was a workers' first package that was exceptional, and it's being lauded actually around the world. If we hadn't had that in place, you would not want to see the airlines today. We would not be able to respond to this. However, what I do want to say is that, yes, they did push people out the door during that time. They took advantage of that. But we did put controls on them. There's a ban on stock buybacks until the end of September, a cap on executive pay until next March. So there were some controls on greed here that the unions pushed for. Even so, they took measures to cut a lot of staff during this time. And Ed Bastian, for example, the CEO of Delta, has bragged about the juniority benefits, paying people less at the lower end of the pay scale. And at Delta, for example, they are operating with way fewer thousands of fewer flight attendants this year with the same number of flight hours than they were in 2019. So there's some criticism for the airlines here, too. But I do want to remind people that when flights don't take off or they're canceled, it's not not always the airline's fault. And so show a little empathy to the people on the front lines. We're trying to do everything we can, but we're going to get you there safely too. So we're not going to put you in a situation where that flight might be unsafe because we're rushing.
Yeah, and I think you said you've been on 3 flights in the past few days, and all of them were on time, right? Is that true?
All of them were on time.
Okay,
that's
good.
True.
See?
You heard me say that. Okay,
See?
yes.
Okay,
yes.
good. All right, so it's not as bad as it seems, maybe. All right, Sarah Nelson, nice to see you. Thank you so much.
Nice to see you too. Thank you.
Happy you too.